You know, when I read the Daily Word, I was really, the phrase that kept coming to mind to me is generosity of spirit. And I just love the sound of that phrase, even. Generosity of spirit. Maybe you could say it with me. I have a generosity of spirit. And to me, that takes generosity to a whole nother level. And maybe that's what Paul is referring to in that scripture passage where he says, now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the spirit that is from God, that we may understand the gifts bestowed by God. And so I thought being in the flow is clearly an important part of that. So I just wanted to start out by asking you, see if I can get this to work here. I'm sorry, it's not. Oh, okay. Thank you. Maybe it needs a new battery. How are you today? If someone wants to ask, how are you? Hopefully.
Better than yesterday.
Better than yesterday. Okay. You're still here. That's good.
Yeah, the day. Wonderful.
Wonderful. Something wonderful. Okay. Glad to be alive at this brand new baby day. So we could have a lot of different answers, but here's one that Eric Butterworth often would say when people would ask him, how are you? He would say, fundamentally, I am in the flow of life, and I feel great. So why don't we try that on? Why don't you say that with me? Fundamentally, I am in the flow of life, and I feel great. Oh, I like that. I'm going to say that. I'm going to say it more often. But so I promised in the title for the lesson that we advertised in the email blast that I would reveal today a secret about, not a secret, a new understanding I've had about how Jesus fed the multitudes. And I don't know if we have a picture of that, or that's the next one. Thanks, Christy. But, obviously this has got to be a really important story. Other than the resurrection, it's the only miracle by Jesus that appears in all 4 of the Gospels. So, obviously, 4 different authors or writers or people that put together these things thought this was a really important story. And I don't know, maybe some of the little details are different. 4,000, those was 5,000 were fed. Five loaves, did they have 5 loaves and 2 fish, or 7 loaves and a few fish? It doesn't matter. It makes the point that this was a story about how Jesus, somehow with very modest resources, was able to feed thousands of people who had gathered to hear him speak and heal the sick. And you can just kind of imagine the disciples, the students that were with him here. Jesus had been preaching all day and healing people, and then it came time to look at feeding people, and probably people were getting hungry. Their stomachs were starting to grumble. They'd been sitting there watching and listening for several hours, and people get kind of grumpy sometimes when they're hungry. Their stomachs are grumbling, and they probably said to Jesus, oh my gosh, there's all these people. How are we possibly going to feed them? And so the disciples, were really focused on what appeared to be this huge need in the world and the apparent lack. Oh my God, we only got a little bit here. What are we going to do? And I've told this, we've talked about this story many times, and I've always thought about the 3 main points. The 3 things that I think it looks like Jesus did in this story. He looked up first. He looked up. And to me that symbolizes not just that there's some man in the sky that's got all the good stuff, but it symbolizes lifting our consciousness. That he raised his consciousness, he acknowledged the source of all the good, everything that all of our needs are met, that God, infinite presence, infinite source, a way, is is the source of everything we need. And then we're told that he blessed and gave thanks for what they had. You know, he didn't curse it and, oh, it's not enough. He blessed it. He gave thanks for it. And then he told the disciples, go ahead and start. Begin with what you've got. Start passing it out. And he didn't say, oh no, we got to wait until more shows up or something. He just said, begin with what we've got. And I thought, boy, those are really 3 good lessons, 3 points. I can't argue with that. But then we're told at the end that everyone was fed and there was food left over. And so it's like, wow, how did that happen? It could leave someone kind of still wondering, And there's a picture, I think, of a little person like, what? And, for some of us, it's good enough to just trust. Okay, I'm gonna, focus on God. The golden key idea in the midst of a problem, put my attention on God and not the problem, and be grateful and just begin and trust that it's all going to work out. And for a lot of us, that's good enough, and that has worked for me many, many times. But then I thought, well, sometimes I think there's other parts of us that are the analytic mind that wants to know, no, really, where did the food come from? I want to know what happened. Where does this stuff come from? And so, I feel like this is one of those times, and I love this. This is one of those times when I think when we're reading the Bible, we need to sometimes read between the lines, or dig a little deeper, or use our power of imagination to maybe imagine some possibilities that aren't written there on the page. And maybe there's something more to the story that just didn't get written down or got lost in all the translations. So here's another version, another possibility that I heard Reverend Dr. Gary Simmons suggest, and I really like it. He said, well, maybe we could think about this story is that maybe some of these thousands of people had brought some food with them, that they had traveled a fair distance to get there, and they knew they were going to be gone all day or for a few days. Don't you do that when you're going to be gone for a day or you're going on a road trip? You might put a little picnic basket in the back of your house in the back of your car so you can stop and eat a sandwich on it. So maybe they brought some food with them. And so that was it. Maybe the disciples said to them, hey, some of you have a lot extra, share what you've got. And some of you who don't have anything or you just have a little, take what you need. And if you brought extra, share it. And maybe that's how it happened, that it was already there right within the community. And that they just all had to give what they had, what they could. And actually, this is a part of that you're going to be hearing more about over the coming years, this integral model for ministry, that this is what kind of the approach to the funding model is asking everyone who's in ownership or partnership with our ministry to give what they can from a generosity of spirit. And some people can, we're all in totally different places. Some people can write some big checks and give a lot of money, and some people give other amounts, and some people just need to receive for a while until as things get better in their lives. But that everybody, how could it be that everybody's contributions, whatever it is, helps to make the whole possible? And I thought about, well, that's kind of one of the lines in the Daily Word today. It says, whatever I share with a loving and giving heart blesses me as much as it blesses the one that receives it. And so maybe that's how those multitudes got fed, is that right there amongst the community there was more than enough to feed everybody. But some people had brought extra. They could put out a blanket and share what they had, and some people hadn't brought very much, and they needed to be invited to share with others. So, I was thinking also about another passage from Jesus, and I don't know if you remember a few weeks ago, I introduced the idea of a conundrum. And I said that Jesus teaches in a lot of different ways. He taught some with healings, he taught with miracles, he taught with statements and messages and telling stories and parables. And he also presented some conundrums. You remember what a conundrum is? It's what?
Dilemma.
A dilemma. Yeah, it's like a sentence or a story that you think, oh, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make much sense, or you're really left kind of scratching your head thinking, oh boy. So I was going to say, are you ready for another one, a stumper, another conundrum? And this is one that I wanted to share that I feel like is along the same lines in our discussion today about generosity and giving. And Jesus said this in Matthew 10:34. He said, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword." Now doesn't that, what? What? I thought he said he came to bring peace. And here's the rest of the passage. I didn't have to put it up there. Then he goes on to say, "For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's foes will be members of one's own household." Wow. There's gonna put that in your pipe and smoke it, or go home and think about it. That should make that your homework assignment. Come back next week with an essay explaining what you think this means. I haven't come to bring peace. I've come to bring a sword. Well, would you like to hear a metaphysical understanding of that passage? You know, I think what Jesus is saying is that the Christ present, whenever we see a story in the Bible with Jesus, metaphysically it represents the Christ presence within ourselves. And that Christ presence is saying to us as students, as followers, as disciples, that to follow this path of spiritual realization, one, it may not be easy. It may disturb our peace of mind. It might challenge our thoughts and beliefs, things that we cling to for comfort. And the sword, swords can do several things. Sword, of course, can be a weapon and can do harm to people, but it can also cut through things. Cut to we sometimes use the expression, cut to the heart of the matter. When somebody's going on and on, you just want to say, cut to the chase. What's your main point? Or cut the, I don't want to say it, C-R-A-P, cut it out. Just cut to the main point. So a knife brings clarity. It's like Jesus said, like your yeses be yeses and your noes be noes. We have to know sometimes, have spiritual discernment and right thinking about, separating the wheat from the chaff, and this made me think about or remember an experience I had in ministerial school. This was kind of a funny story. Every year, it was the tradition that the class had to put together a class play, a skit that would perform for everybody at Unity Village. And our class put together this play about MEP, was Ministerial Education Program, MEP TV. It was a whole series of short little skits or vignettes about, situations in life. And then there was two of us. It turned out to be me and Larry. We were the couple that were sitting on this living room couch at the bottom of the stage. And we were narrating this MEP TV, all the different vignettes and skits. And Larry and I had a remote control that we kept in our hand. And the remote control was actually a BS detector. So every time somebody in a skit said something that wasn't true, or that we thought wasn't, we would hit our BS detector and it would make this loud buzzing sound, like a game show on TV, how it is when somebody wrong answer there, So Larry and I were doing the BS detector. But I thought, well, that's a little bit like the sword. Maybe that's what Jesus is referring to as the sword helps us separate truth from BS, or what's not true. And a sharp sword helps us cut through confusion to clarity. And so it helps us to make really important distinctions in life. And I thought about, Eric Butterworth, he wrote a book he wrote many books, of course, and they're all good, but one of them was called In the Flow, being in the flow of life. And he said to be in the flow that there are some really important distinctions you have to understand. If you don't get these, and to me these are examples of the sword, if you don't get these distinctions, it's going to be really hard to be in the flow or have a generosity of spirit. And the first distinction that he said that Jesus taught really was that life is meant to be lived from within out, not outside in. That life is meant to be lived from within out. So stuff happens around us, of course, and we want to try to change things or fix things or bring peace to the world. But we need to remember that we're the ones that are in charge of our own internal state of peace or our attitude towards the world, and that, of course it's hard not to react to things or see things out there, but we need to keep coming back to life is meant to be lived from within out. How can I see this through the eyes of love? How can I call upon my spiritual qualities? I heard someone talking recently, and they were talking about a workshop they had taken, and it was a really deep transformational workshop, looking at your projections, and how do we project our own incomplete or unfinished business on. And he said that what they had to do in this workshop, one of the exercises, was they had to go around to everybody in the room one-on-one and say, the judgment I have about you is, and what that means about you, and what that means about me, because I have that judgment. And he said it was really profound. It really helped him to see how much we project our own stuff. And what I found is that sometimes when I get triggered, one is, of course, the quantum living class that Annabelle is teaching is a really good help for that. But, when we find ourselves being triggered, we can ask ourselves, what am I feeling? And what's an unmet need in this situation? What does it take me back to an earlier memory? And how can I show compassion for myself? I had an experience just recently where, I kind of got triggered by something. And when I realized that the unmet need was feeling understood or appreciated, and then what it took me back to, it's like sometimes just 2 or 3 questions are like send you down this tunnel really to a deep place very quickly. I realized it took me back to when I was in high school, and my mother was very sick, and she died, and hardly nobody in our, my dad no, but no one, we didn't tell anybody at school. I didn't really have much immediate family around. I really felt alone and isolated. I didn't have anybody to really talk to share about my mother's illness and her passing. And, she finally had to take an overdose of pills and pass. And I realized that today I can sometimes have that feeling, a moment of feeling like, oh, I'm alone and nobody understands what I'm going through, and I don't have anybody to talk to. And So I got the connection between, an early childhood experience and how sometimes that shows up now. And so this idea of practicing compassion with ourselves. I heard somebody say this week that all wars would end if we just knew how to practice self-compassion. And many of us don't know how to do it enough when we really need it. The pain transmitted is pain that's untransformed. Or when we haven't transformed our pain or our trauma, we tend to pass it on. So that's just a little bit of thinking about how is it that life is meant to be lived from the inside out rather than out there. Because the world is what it is, and things happen, and we have to be in the world but not of the world. So the second thing that Eric Butterworth says that's an important distinction is he said our good doesn't come to us, but it comes through us. That our good comes through us as we express that the whole universe is at the same time, right, where you're sitting and you're seated and you're seated and you're seated. That God is a circumference that's never ending, but a point that's within each of us. And so we just have to know that we need to be the channel through which God's good comes into the world. And I know I heard somebody say one time that, just kind of be aware of your conversation. And if you feel like you're having a little bit of things are going down a little bit of a negative road, ask yourself, do I want more of this in the world? And if you don't, then find a way to shift the conversation a little bit to something positive. Do I want more of this in the world? Something wonderful. Yeah, that's what I want more of. So our good comes not to us, but through us. And then the last distinction, he says, is rather than trying to make something happen, really what we need to do is clear whatever it is that's blocking the natural flow through us, around us, within us. And, I've told this story a lot of times. My friend Jim Labrie, who wanted to buy me lunch one day, and I said, oh no, you don't have to buy me lunch. And he got really mad and upset, and he said, don't stand on my hose, I want to buy you lunch. and that he thought, buying lunch for somebody or being generous with somebody, that promoted the flow in his life. It was coming from his generosity of spirit. And so he didn't want me to, he said, no, just say yes, just say thank you, I accept. And maybe we can all just practice that right now. Just say thank you, I accept. When someone offers to hold the door open or help you in some way, or remember to don't say, oh no, don't bother, or you're busy. Just say thank you, I accept. Be my friend. So those are some things that open the flow, that clear the blockages. And then this last, that second part of that conundrum, we'll go back the other way. Or maybe go back to the quote, the passage from, I'm sorry, this thing isn't working. Yeah, stay on that. That after Jesus said this, that I didn't come to bring peace, I brought a sword. Then he goes on to say about our family, and that what was it? I've come to set a man against his father, a daughter against his mother, and all this stuff that just like this makes no sense. But then when I thought about, maybe what he's talking about is that it's not actually our parents, but it's the thoughts and beliefs. A male character in the Bible represents our thoughts, a female character represents our feelings, but we inherit, we inherit thoughts and beliefs and patterns of things from our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents. In fact, I just did a writing exercise recently. It was called inherited healing your inherited family trauma. And just looking at what were the messages that you got, or what were some patterns in your family that you can see that have kind of carried on through generations. And there really is something to this ancestral trauma that we need to work to heal. And, I found that I have some patterns around acceptance, always trying to find acceptance outside of myself, and not feeling good enough, feeling like I have to keep trying to overwork and overperform. So all these things are kind of deep healing work. And as my friend said, that if we really learn to do self-compassion and to heal our trauma, there wouldn't be wars in the world. And then finally, Jesus finishes up this passage by saying, one's foes will be members of your own household. To me, that's kind of like, the modern day version of that is Pogo saying, hey, we've met the enemy, and it's us. It's our household is just our own thoughts, our own mind, our collection of beliefs and assumptions and patterns. And it's like, we met the enemy, and it's not out there, it's in here. And, it's sort of like the story about the man who was getting ready to move to a new city. And he asked somebody, well, what's it like in that city? What are the people like there? And somebody from the city said, well, what were the people like in the place you're coming from? And he said, they were rude and unfriendly, and people were disrespectful and stingy and didn't help each other. Nobody said a word to each other. And so the man said, well, that's what you're going to find the people are like in this new city where you're coming. And then somebody else was moving to this new city, and he asked somebody the same question, what are the people like here? And the man asked, well, what were the people like in the city where you came from? And he said, they were really friendly and kind. It was easy to make connections with people. They would smile at you on the street. If somebody offered, if you needed something, someone would offer to help. And so the man said, well, and that's where you're going to find the people are like here, in this new place that you're coming. As Jesus says, that our foes are the members of our own household, but also our friends are the members of our own household. Our greatest gifts, that we may understand the gifts that God has bestowed on us. So there is hope. There's good news. Eric Butterworth says, if you keep on until you catch on, you will gain a new perspective on life that will lead to a new experience in living. I don't know why this isn't working here. Well, go on up to the, yeah. And so I feel like, being in the flow of life, we could just say this together. I am in the flow of life when I graciously and gratefully give and receive. To me, that's sort of a generosity of spirit. When Paul said we've received not the spirit of the world, but the spirit that is from God, then we understand the gifts that are bestowed on us by God. And the gifts are within us. It's our ability to be loving and kind and to remember to be compassionate with each other. Especially this time, the more I learn about trauma right now, I just want to say to all of us, even if you don't watch the news at all, or if you just catch little glimpses of it, there's something called vicarious trauma, just hearing about things or seeing glimpses of tragedies that are happening. It affects, it affects each of us. And I think it's pretty hard to be in this world and not be aware of things that are going on. We need to be aware, but to also practice self-compassion so that we can, I read an article somebody read recently, what to do when war breaks out. And this unity minister said, first of all, rest and relax and practice extreme self-care. And then read some things, fill your mind with ideas about peace and kindness and compassion, and pray for what is yours to do. And then act after you've done all those other things. So I think this is a time when we need to remember that, to remember what is self-compassion look like, and how do we practice that, fill ourselves up, and then find what is ours to do from that overflowing. God knows we all have things in our own lives and our families that we're dealing with that already maybe have us pretty full to the top. So with this, I want to close with that quote again from Eric Butterworth, that last quote. Maybe, Christy, why don't we say this together? Fundamentally, I am in the flow of life, and I feel great. And we can use that energy to fill the world with more of what we want to see in the world, amongst and between peoples, and countries and nations, and people and animals.